Continuing now with Chapter 3, titled The Feed of Superbloom by Nicholas Carr. Superbloom, How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart. We left off in the middle of Chapter 3, and we begin now with a section titled The Algorithmic Editor. The Internet's original design metaphors, domain, site, page, came from the material world. They provided a sense, or at least an illusion, of continuity with the stability and fixity of physical media. The connection was severed during the first decade of the 21st century, when social media platforms began experimenting with more dynamic ways to distribute information. The design metaphors that soon emerged, feed, stream, loop, scroll, stressed flux and fluidity. Nothing lasts, they suggested. Nothing has more than passing interest. Facebook's introduction of the news feed in the early morning hours of September 5th, 2006, crystallized the changes. Before the feed, Facebook looked and worked like a traditional website. Modeled on the class directories that colleges used to hand out to incoming freshmen, it consisted of a series of pages, each containing a user profile. On entering the site, members would land on their own profile page and then click one by one through their friends' pages, picking and choosing what to look at. The news feed unstitched Facebook's metaphorical bindings. The news feed, each member now saw a continuous, customized stream of posts and updates, automatically chosen by a content filtering algorithm written by the company's coders. The news feed was the product of an intensive year-long project, by far the most complex programming effort the young company had ever attempted. It was inspired by Mark Zuckerberg's frustration with the inefficiency, the friction of online communication, which to his mind stemmed from the involvement of human beings in the process of evaluating, selecting, and sharing information. Whereas computers were fast, predictable, and programmable, people were slow, capricious, and difficult to control. As Ruchi Sangvi, the Zuckerberg lieutenant who led the newsfeed project, would later put it, the company's reliance on individuals to seek out information on their own, to go to one person's profile and then another, was hugely inefficient. The feed removed human deliberation and judgment from the process. It replaced personal agency with machine agency. Although Claude Shannon might have bristled at the association, the news feed was the logical conclusion of his mathematical theory of communication. When Facebook's algorithm evaluated, ranked, and organized information, it did so without regard to the information's meaning. The semantic aspects of communication were irrelevant to its calculations. But whereas Shannon and his Bell System employer were concerned only with the transmission of information, the transport function, the Facebook algorithm made editorial decisions. It selected what people would see or not see through a statistical analysis of their past behavior, as well as the behavior of people like them. The algorithm delivered whatever pattern of zeros and ones it calculated to have the highest probability of grabbing and holding people's attention, as measured by the time they'd spend looking at or responding to a post. If judged from a semantic perspective, the perspective of, say, a human editor, the resulting stream of content appeared random. It was just one thing after another: a video of a laughing baby, a news headline about a school shooting, a photo of a friend on vacation, an ad for a toenail fungus remedy, a contouring tip from a Kardashian, a story about microplastics in the ocean. Everything in the feed was given the same semantic weight, which was no weight. Everything had the same semantic context, which was no context. Zuckerberg explained the news feed's rationale to his staff in a memorable sentence. A squirrel dying in front of your house may be more relevant to your interests right now than people dying in Africa. The statement is grotesque not because it's false. It's altogether true, but because it invokes a category error. It yokes together in an obscene comparison two events of radically different scale and import. And yet, in his callous way, Zuckerberg articulated the essence of content collapse. Social media renders category errors obsolete because it renders categories obsolete. All information belongs to a single category. It's all content. and it pours through a single channel with a single objective: maximizing engagement. News, entertainment, conversation, and all other forms of human expression would from now on be in direct competition, angling for both the consumer's fleeting attention and the algorithm's blessing. When Facebook members came face to face with the news feed for the first time on the morning of September 5th, they rebelled. Having their posts and updates circulated to other people automatically felt like a violation of privacy and trust. Many of them realized for the first time that everything they did on the site was being monitored by the company. "You pretty much are being tracked with every movement you make on Facebook," one user complained. "It's like someone peeking in on my conversations." Hundreds of thousands of members protested the change, posting and reposting angry comments on the site and joining Facebook groups with names like Students Against Facebook Newsfeed, I Hate Facebook, I Hate Facebook, and Ruchi is the Devil. Time declared it social media's first official revolution. Within a few hours, Zuckerberg had rushed out a sorry, not sorry apology in the form of a Facebook post with the title, "Calm down, breathe, we hear you." He expressed regret for sparking the fury, but at the same time defended the feed. "We agree, stalking isn't cool, but being able to know what's going on in your friends' lives is." What Zuckerberg didn't mention is that the company's traffic measures were already showing that the feed was a huge success. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. The journalist Stephen Levy later reported on the scene playing out inside Facebook's headquarters while the users were fuming. Sangvi and her team were looking at the logs and finding something amazing. Even as hundreds of thousands of users expressed their disapproval of Newsfeed, their behavior indicated that they felt otherwise. Users were spending more time on Facebook than ever before. It was a validation of the entire concept. In other words, this is me, not a car. We walked right into their trap. The protests themselves, as they swept back and forth across the network, growing in size and intensity, proved how effective a content filtering algorithm could be in galvanizing people's attention, stirring their emotions, and encouraging them to post, comment, and share. Outrage, anger, and mob action all were signals of extraordinarily high engagement. And after the protests faded, the students soon realized that they liked the convenience of getting all content of interest through a single automated stream rather than having to traipse across pages. The engagement remained. All those zeros and ones had come into perfect alignment. Responsive chords. That's CHORD, that kind of chord. A few pages into Tony Schwartz's 1973 bestseller, The Responsive Chord, there appears a black and white photograph of a factory, its smokestacks silhouetted against the sky. The image, Schwartz comments, will provoke different but equally visceral reactions, depending on who's looking at it. To some, it will say progress. It will conjure up positive feelings related to technological innovation, good jobs, attractive new products, and prosperity. To others, it will say pollution. It will conjure up negative feelings related to industrial exploitation, corporate rapacity, greed, and ecological disaster. The photo expresses no fixed meaning, Schwartz stresses. Its meaning is created by the responsive chord it strikes in the mind of the viewer. Born in New York City in 1923, Schwartz was a media polymath. As a boy, he was a ham radio enthusiast and displayed a talent for drawing and design. During World War II, having earned a degree in graphic design from the Pratt Institute, he served as an artist for the U.S. Navy, creating posters promoting the war effort. After the war, he worked on Madison Avenue as an art director for several advertising agencies before starting his own shop, the Wexton Company. He had a sideline as an audio engineer, recording albums, producing radio shows, and designing Broadway soundscapes. He acted as a media advisor to captains of industry, celebrities, and politicians. He taught courses on communication and design at top universities, appeared regularly on television as a commentator, and wrote widely discussed books and articles. He was also an agoraphobe, a recluse, like Charles Cooley, but more so. Fearful of encountering people on the street, he spent most of his time and did most of his work in his Manhattan studio on the ground floor of what had once been a Pentecostal church. His reliance on communication technologies in his day-to-day life made him a particularly sensitive interpreter of media's uses and effects. Schwartz is largely forgotten now, but his best-known work, the Daisy advertisement he created for Lyndon Johnson in his presidential campaign against Barry Goldwater in 1964, remains a cultural touchstone. Very memorable for those of my generation. The stark 1-minute spot, aired on television only once, 2 months before the vote, makes no mention of Goldwater. It shows a freckle-faced little girl standing in a field of daisies, plucking petals from one of the flowers. As she gets down to the last petal, the image freezes, and the camera slowly zooms in on her face. We hear a man's voice in the middle of a countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7. When he reaches 0, the girl's image is replaced by one of an atomic bomb exploding. A mushroom cloud takes shape, and Johnson, in a solemn voiceover, says, "These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark." The ad embodied Schwartz's resonance theory of communication. In an age of mass media, he posited, people have more information than they can handle. To seize their attention and influence their thoughts and behavior, you don't need to give them more stuff to think about. You need to activate the information and attendant emotions already present in their memory. In communicating at electronic speed, he wrote, we no longer direct information into an audience, but try to evoke stored information out of them in a patterned way. End quote. A successful message doesn't deliver meaning, it calls forth meaning. That which we put into the communication has no meaning in itself. The meaning of our communication is what a listener or viewer gets out of his experience with the communicator's stimuli. The Daisy ad presented a series of simple audiovisual stimuli: an innocent girl, a meadow full of flowers, a countdown, mushroom cloud, intended to trigger responses latent in the minds of a targeted subset of the audience in order to increase the odds they'd get out and vote for LBJ. It worked. Though Schwartz was probably unaware of it, he was in his 80s when it happened. Facebook's introduction of the news feed put his ideas at the very core of media. The resonance theory helps us understand why mindless machines, through a statistical analysis of behavioral variables, can so thoroughly command people's attention. The power of the feed algorithm doesn't lie in the meaning of the messages it delivers. The algorithm knows nothing of meaning, but rather in its ability to match messages to individuals' emotional triggers. It automates the striking of responsive chords. It gives everyone a custom stream of Daisy ads. For Claude Shannon, the fundamental problem of communication had been getting a message from one place to another as quickly as possible without distortion. For Mark Zuckerberg and his Silicon Valley mates, the fundamental problem of communication was putting the most resonant message in front of an individual at the most opportune moment. The essential function of the mechanism of communication wasn't transport anymore. It was manipulation. Manipulation of information, and by extension, manipulation of those receiving the information. Before the feed, it was possible to argue that Facebook was a common carrier, a dumb network that transmitted messages without regard to their content. After the feed, Facebook was a different beast, part broadcaster, part wiretapper, part propagandist. Sin eaters. It was also, to the great discomfort of the company and its CEO, part censor. On the Saturday after Christmas in 2008, a dozen members of the Mothers International Lactation Campaign, or MILC, milk, gathered outside Facebook's headquarters in Palo Alto to breastfeed their babies. They were protesting the company's practice of removing photographs of nursing women from its site. One of the lactivists explained to a reporter that she had recently uploaded a picture of herself suckling her 9-month-old, and Facebook had deleted it, with a warning that if she continued to post such photos, she risked banishment from the network. The milk demonstration gained wide and sympathetic coverage in the press, and it echoed through Facebook itself. More than 80,000 users joined a group named Hey Facebook, not easy to say all this. More than 80,000 users joined a group named Hey Facebook, Breastfeeding is Not Obscene. The company rushed out a spokesman to make an official statement. "We agree that breastfeeding is natural and beautiful," he cheerily began, then went on to stress that photos containing a fully exposed breast, as defined by showing the nipple or areola, do violate our terms on obscene, pornographic, or sexually explicit material. As the clumsy response suggests, Facebook was taken off guard by the protest. At the time, 2 years after the news feed's debut, the company had yet to establish a formal process for dealing with controversial content. A small team of low-level, largely untrained employees have been assigned the job of reviewing users' complaints about other users' posts and pictures. They followed, as Dave Wilner, the company's first head of content policy, would later describe it, a set of vague guidelines written on a single sheet of paper that took the form of a list of things you should delete. So it was things like Hitler and naked people. Their rule of thumb, as another Facebook employee would recall, was subjective in the extreme. If it makes you feel bad in your gut, then go ahead and take it down. Because it had been founded as a site for college kids, with each member required to have a verified .edu email account, Facebook in its early years was insulated from the dark content that was showing up in ever greater quantities elsewhere on the web. Other social networks weren't so lucky. After Google bought YouTube in October 2006, the search giant immediately faced difficult decisions about disturbing videos posted to the site, often by anonymous users. In December, 2 videos of Saddam Hussein's execution appeared. One showed his hanging, the other his corpse. Though both seemed to violate a company policy prohibiting graphic violence, YouTube's content moderation team, led by one of Google's top corporate lawyers, decided to allow the video of the hanging, deeming it of historical importance, even as it removed the video of the body. Not long after, a mysterious, grainy video of a man being severely beaten by several other men was uploaded to the site. The moderators quickly took down the clip and then just as quickly put it back up. They had learned in the interim that the video had been filmed by an Egyptian human rights activist and apparently showed the beating of a detainee in a police interrogation cell. The depiction of violence was intended to document state oppression, not titillate sadists. Facebook, as it pursued rapid growth to satisfy its early investors, soon found itself grappling with the same kinds of uncomfortable choices. At the end of 2006, the company lifted its restrictions on membership, opening its virtual doors to everyone. In early 2007, it began allowing users to upload videos. In 2008, it released its first mobile app, turning smartphones and their cameras into powerful and ubiquitous media production tools. As millions, then billions of people joined the network, the news feed became much more than a conduit for chatter, gossip, and selfies. It became a primary source of news, entertainment, and advertising from pretty much everybody everywhere. It also became a primary outlet for the demonic in man. Images of Hitler and naked people were the least of it. Facebook found itself broadcasting videos of rapes and murders, photographs of child abuse and animal torture, racist and sexist screeds, revenge porn, recruitment pitches by terrorist organizations, and threats of violence against individuals and groups. Weeding out the bad stuff proved to the company's frustration resistant to automation. Thanks to their pattern-snatching capabilities, computers were able to block images that had previously been identified as, say, child pornography, but their obliviousness to meaning rendered them useless when it came to evaluating most suspect content. As YouTube's struggles had made clear, interpreting words and pictures demands more than the application of a set of explicit rules. It can't be reduced to a statistical analysis of patterns of digits. It entails subtle judgments about context, a sensitivity to cultural norms, an appreciation of linguistic and visual ambiguity, and an ability to judge intent and weigh contending interests. Figuring out whether a video of a hanging is newsworthy or purely malicious requires an understanding of who's being killed and why, the historical and political background of the event, and the motivations of the person doing the recording, as well as a familiarity with journalistic ethics, local laws, and social norms. It requires a worldly perspective. It requires human beings. As controversies over content mounted during 2009, Facebook rushed to set up a formal moderation program. Its small ad hoc team ballooned into a vast worldwide bureaucracy, encompassing thousands of workers and reams of guidelines and checklists. Today, the company reportedly has upwards of 15,000 moderators, most of whom are recruited and managed by big outsourcing firms such as Accenture and Cognizant. Whenever a user or an algorithm flags a potentially offending piece of content, something that happens a few million times a day, a moderator reviews it on a screen and decides whether to remove it or not. The rules the moderators follow can be at once disturbingly detailed and bafflingly abstruse, as was revealed in 2012 when a disgruntled former moderator leaked to the press a confidential guidebook used by contractors in reviewing content. The document, which Facebook called a snapshot of its moderation standards at the time, bans images of internal organs, bone, muscle, tendons, etc., but allows images of crushed heads, limbs, etc., and deep flesh wounds. What's rarely heard in the outrage over the ugly content that pervades social media is an acknowledgement of the public's role in its spread. The vast shadowy infrastructure of moderation is necessary because feed algorithms promote the bad stuff, and the algorithms promote the bad stuff for the same reason they promote any content, because people are drawn to it. The algorithms are adept at reading the human id and satisfying its desires, however twisted. For 2 years, beginning in 2015, a West Virginia couple ran a YouTube channel called Daddy05 that featured videos of them performing cruel pranks on their young children, often reducing the kids to tears. The channel was hugely popular and generated millions of hits, according to a contemporary report in The Guardian newspaper. It formed a core part of YouTube's content aimed at children. After the pair were arrested for child neglect in 2017, the mother told a reporter by way of explanation that her family, quote, would get excited when they got a lot of views. Gruesome or perverse images and words are extreme examples of the clickbait and trolling that have grabbed eyeballs online since people first connected to bulletin board systems through dial-up modems. Algorithmic feedback loops amplify a signal that's always been there. That's little comfort to the moderators. Their work, described by the Wall Street Journal as the worst job in technology, is grueling and distressing. A typical moderator, well-educated but working for low pay with little job security, will review as many as 8,000 flagged posts a day, often witnessing acts of unimaginable depravity. In describing the job, one former moderator told the Journal, "I was watching the content of deranged psychos in the woods somewhere who don't have a conscience for the texture or feel of human connection. Many of the moderators end up traumatized, some suffering psychological problems long after they quit the work. One woman in the field compared herself and her colleagues to the sin eaters of the 17th century, desperate paupers who would be given a little money to eat bread at funerals in order to assume the sins of the deceased." Social media firms have gone to great lengths to keep the grim modern ritual of content moderation hidden from the public. The work conflicts with the upbeat image they like to promote. It also grates against their political ideals. Like other internet entrepreneurs, the founders of the major social networks lean toward libertarianism. They're free speech absolutists who celebrate radical openness and transparency and find any form of censorship repellent, especially when it occurs on the net. Given the choice, most of them would not have gotten into the content moderation business at all. But as executives beholden to shareholders, they had no choice. They couldn't risk repelling users and advertisers. As the legal scholar Kate Klonick wrote in a 2018 Harvard Law Review article on content moderation, the primary reason companies take down obscene and violent material is the threat that allowing such material poses to potential profits. While the companies may be motivated by private concerns, their moderation programs, like their filtering algorithms, have an enormous impact on public affairs. In addition to deciding the fate of obscene and violent material, moderators make decisions about speech in general, drawing lines, always subjective and often arbitrary, between what's permissible and what's not. In 2010, the law professor and First Amendment authority Jeffrey Rosen observed that Facebook has more power in determining who can speak and who can be heard around the globe than any Supreme Court justice, any king, or any president. That power, now spread across many social platforms, is greater today. We may have stopped talking about the role of the public interest in governing decisions about who's published about what's published and broadcast, but the public interest is still being taken into account. It's just not happening out in the open through established political and judicial procedures and institutions. The public interest is being interpreted in secret by large corporations that see the public not as a polity, but as a customer base. We've outsourced the stewardship of speech to big tech. Oracles and Orphic words. Thanks to its success in attracting and holding an audience, and despite the controversies surrounding the content it dishes out, Facebook's algorithmic news feed quickly became the template for other social media platforms and then for traditional media companies as they shifted their offerings online. Everyone rushed into the business of information engineering and, whether they wanted to or not, content moderation. When the smartphone displaced the laptop and desktop as the public's preferred personal computer, feeds, streams, loops, and scrolls proved ideally suited to the device's small, responsive touchscreen and its continually updated apps. Swiping became second nature to all of us, up, down, left, right. And because the combination of digitization and deregulation had removed the secrecy of correspondence doctrine as a legal barrier to corporate snooping, media outfits and other internet companies were free to track every touch and tap, using the data to further optimize their algorithms. An automated feedback loop, controlled by a few businesses, now governed the flow of information throughout society. We didn't have to write fan mail or otherwise voice our opinions to marketers. The medium itself was gathering our reactions. That the news feed was introduced almost exactly 100 years after Reginald Fessenden's Christmas Eve radio broadcast may be a coincidence, but it helps put our current situation into historical perspective. Behind the rise of mass media during the past century, a less visible but even more fundamental shift was unfolding: the industrialization of communication. As media systems advanced from the electric to the electronic to the digital, the spirit of the Industrial Revolution, with its stress on measurement and productivity, expanded from factories and offices into the intellectual and political realms of conversation, discourse, and debate. The push to achieve ever greater efficiency in information exchange, guided by Shannon's equations and accelerated by business competition, became a major force shaping social relations. The goal of optimizing human communication for efficiency was never controversial. It seemed like a logical extension of the widely held belief that the public square should operate as a marketplace of ideas. Just as free competition among manufacturers ensures that the best goods win out over inferior ones, the assumption goes, so free competition among thinkers serves to winnow good thoughts from bad, facts from falsehoods. In the battle for the public mind, the strongest ideas triumph. The belief had its origins in the Enlightenment. In Areopagitica, his radical 1644 treatise opposing censorship, John Milton declared that if all the winds of doctrine were let loose to play upon the earth, truth would invariably win out. Let her and falsehood grapple, whoever knew truth put to the worse in a free and open encounter, he wrote. Thomas Jefferson, in his 1801 inaugural address, assured the public that error of opinion may be tolerated, as long as reason is left free to combat it. The analogy to industrial competition was made explicit by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. in his famous dissent in the Supreme Court's 1919 First Amendment case, Abrams et al. V. United States. The ultimate good is served by free trade in ideas, he wrote. The best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. As industrial markets gain from efficiency, so too would their intellectual counterparts. The more efficient the mechanism of communication, the more freely and quickly the competition of ideas would play out. Underlying the ideal of a marketplace of ideas is another ideal drawn from economics, that of the virtue of abundance. Traditional economic theory is built on the unhappy assumption that in a world of friction and constraint, physical goods are inherently subject to scarcity. When too many people desire a product in limited supply, the market works to curb demand through price increases. Sometimes the state has to step in to prevent so-called tragedies of the commons, where people or businesses rush to consume, exploit, or hoard important resources to the detriment of the general good. Officials establish laws and regulations, allocating radio spectrum through licensing, for instance, to control demand. When it comes to informational products, however, the internet seemed to herald a new economy of abundance. Because digital goods can be copied endlessly at little or no cost, the public would enjoy limitless quantities of them. Over the past 30 years, the sense of an impending utopia of information abundance has carried an aroma of awesomeness, as a group of local legal scholars wrote in a 2022 journal article. The aroma wafted through popular books with titles like The Zero Marginal Cost Society, The Long Boom, Cognitive Surplus, Free, and Abundance. The future is better than you think. Naive as it turned out to be, the excitement convinced people that the laws and regulations that governed the old scarcity economy were no longer needed. Scarcity could and should allow new communication technologies and the industries built on them to advance without restraint. You can't have too much of a good thing. Facebook's newsfeed culminated the industrialization of communication. It marked the moment when machines took command of media, when the programming of culture through software routines began to feel normal and even given the unremitting flows of information necessary. Once the amount of available content exceeded people's capacity to evaluate and sort it all, turning the epistemic work over to computers, automating it, seemed the obvious solution. And because the public had always welcomed the increasing speed and volume of information flows as a manifestation of technological and social progress, as a ratification of humanity's special destiny, no one questioned the wisdom of applying industrial standards to expressions of thought and emotion. The way we've come to talk about information as a quantifiable resource reveals how thoroughly we've embraced the industrial view. In the 1980s, the Xerox Corporation, a pioneer of personal computing technology, announced that 72 billion new pieces of information are created for us every year, and 75% of all information in existence was created only in the past 20 years. At a business conference in 2010, Google's then CEO, Eric Schmidt, mused about the technology revolution that the internet had set off. There were 5 exabytes of information. That's E-X-A-B-Y-T-E. There were 5 exabytes of information created by the entire world between the dawn of civilization and 2003, he observed. Now that same amount is created every 2 days. The audience reacted with wonder and pride. The Columbia University astrobiologist Caleb Scharf, in his 2021 book, The Ascent of Information, made a similar point. The total number of words spoken by all humans that have ever lived across all their lifetimes comes to around 5 exabytes worth of data. In just 1 year, we can now exceed that by a factor of 400. It's one thing to discuss the storage capacity or throughput of an information network in terms of bits and bytes. It's another thing to reduce human thought and speech, the entire history of culture from the dawn of civilization, to a number, as if one were weighing a shipment of coal or corn syrup. Amen. Implicit in such calculations is a belief that the only information that counts is information that can be encoded and transmitted by machines. Speech and other forms of human expression are raw materials to be processed mechanically. That's exactly the view social media companies have come to take. Just as a potato chip or a cigarette is meticulously engineered to trigger certain biological reactions in the human body and mind, pleasure and craving notably, so communication is now engineered to trigger similar reactions. What fills online feeds, research shows, is content that stirs strong emotions and provokes symptoms of physiological arousal, a quickened heart rate, tensed muscles, dilated pupils. The nervous system is put on alert, primed to respond to incoming stimuli. We feel compelled to scroll more, see more, share more. We're drawn deeper into the feed. Whether we realize it or not, social media churns out information that's been highly processed to stimulate not just engagement, but dependency. Snack food and tobacco companies long tried to distance themselves from the social and medical consequences of their product engineering, maladies such as heart disease, obesity, and cancer. Social media companies have taken a similar tack in trying to distance themselves from the problems arising from their information engineering. When, in a 2018 congressional hearing, Zuckerberg was asked if Facebook is a media company, he was quick to dismiss the idea. I consider us to be a technology company, he said, because the primary thing that we do is have engineers who write code and build products and services. He was attempting, with a cynical echo of Shannon, to distinguish the processing of information from the meaning of information. Facebook had everything to do with the former, but nothing to do with the latter. But in a world of computerized media, the distinction, whatever its engineering or public relations benefits, is specious. Even if semantic considerations are irrelevant to their calculations, the algorithms used to sort and channel information regulate what content is transmitted, the form it takes, and how it's interpreted. They influence meaning both directly by selecting the information people see and indirectly by promoting certain forms of expression and discouraging others. Margaret Mead was right. The manipulation of information is always also the manipulation of meaning. People are not in general influenced by long books or discourses. The American poet John J. Chapman wrote in an 1897 essay on Ralph Waldo Emerson, but by odd fragments of observation which they overhear, sentences or headlines which they read while turning over a book at random or while waiting for dinner to be announced. These are the oracles and Orphic words that get lodged in the mind and bend a man's most stubborn will. Social media is not successful because it goes against our instincts and desires. It's successful because it gives us what we want. As a machine for harvesting attention, its productivity is unmatched. As a machine for bending the will, it is a triumph of efficiency. In engineering what we pay attention to, it also engineers much else about us, how we talk, how we see other people, how we experience the world. And that's the end of chapter 3, and it's the end of part 1, which was titled, end of chapter 3, which was the feed, and the end of part 1, which was collapse. We talked about content collapse and all. The next session, we'll move into part 2, the tragedy of communication, and chapter 4, titled Fast Talking, Fast Thinking. So, thus ends chapter 3 and part 1. Next time, part 2, chapter 4 of Superbloom, How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart by Nicholas Carr. Thank you for watching.